So what exactly is the process? If the Democrats do want to move on from Joe Biden, which has been all the conversation since the disastrous debate last week, what does it actually look like? Matheu knows the ins and outs of this. He's with the Oversight Council on the Heritage Foundation, joining us on KCMO in Kansas City. Max, good morning. Thanks for being here. Appreciate the time. What is step one if the Democratic Party did want to move on from Joe Biden?
Hey there. Good morning, Pete. Thanks for having me. So I think there's a couple things to look at first. The most important thing to remember is that there's 50 different states with 50 different laws on how, they're going to actually withdraw Biden's name on the ballot, substitute a different candidate, and the process for actually going forward with that. So that's first and foremost. Second, there's a lot of different triggering events. So a lot of the current narrative about when Biden will get off the ticket has to do with the convention. And so right now you hear a lot of talking points in the liberal media about making sure that they get a new candidate in before the convention. The reason for that is that a lot of the ballots in certain places like Ohio, Alabama addressed this issue earlier in their legislative session this year, has to do with whether or not the ballots are certified before the convention actually finishes. So I don't know how close you've been following Ohio. Ohio has the governor called a special legislative session to try and address this, to move up their ballot certification date to align with the Democratic convention this year. That's kind of stalled a little bit, but the DNC has a workaround. And in the same way, I think the DNC imagines that any other states where they'd have a ballot certificate issue, they'd be able to do this virtual delegation workaround. So the main point here is that if Biden is removed before the convention ends or before they have the convention, there's less legal obstacles for them moving forward. Now, the bigger issue, which is more what this memo that we put out with the Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation looks at, is post-convention withdrawal. Now, there's certain points that once these states get the ballot certified, there's no opportunity to remove a candidate for anything aside from deaths. There's states like South Carolina that don't allow you to remove candidates for political reasons. And then the third triggering event is post-election. So a lot of this conversation now gets into what we're looking at is how, so post-election, Biden withdraws all of his presidential electors. Who do they actually have to go for? And that puts us in a really sticky position, because what it gives us is Democrats are voting for a candidate who will be withdrawn, and then their votes that they went to Biden are just going to go to a new, whichever candidate or person that they put up for the Democrats. And that there's a lot of issues there. You get into write-in ballots, you get into counting write-in ballots is not easy. It takes even more time. There's a lot of ballot confusion issues that happen then. So those are kind of the three triggering events that we're looking at in terms of holding this administration accountable, making sure that there's integrity in our elections going into 2024, and making sure that, no funny business happens, and that if it does, the Oversight Project is ready and willing to take those pre-election litigation opportunities as they come.
Matheu, Heritage Foundation, is here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM, as always, streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Okay, so a lot there to digest in terms of the ballots being finalized. So what I'm hearing from you is if the Democrats do want to make a move, or if Joe Biden is like seeing the end here, the sooner the better, right? The sooner, the easier it is for the party to move on from Biden, legally speaking and politically speaking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, Biden met with his family this past weekend up at Camp David. I think they've got a lot of vetted interest in not getting him off the ticket. There has been a lot of different factions in the Democratic Party pushing for him to get off. And I think the reason they recognize is that the logistical nightmare of actually switching a ballot post-certification is just not something they want to get into, and rightfully so. I mean, this is 50 different states. The logistic machine to actually get a new candidate on after they've already certified him at the convention is a nightmare. I mean, it's some of this stuff is perfunctory, right? It's just paperwork, but it's paperwork in 50 different states.
Yeah.
And, not to mention 3 of the 6 swing states have very specific withdrawal protocols, right? So the statutes require very specific mechanisms that have to be done for them to actually get a new candidate on the ballot.
Well,
and then also, again, just to caveat all this, there's a lot of maybe this doesn't apply to the president. Presidential elections are done, they have this kind of commingled state and federal apparatus. But, at the end of the day, it's important to remember you don't want to go into an election with any more uncertainty, as we saw in 2020, about how the ballots are actually counted and how they are, afforded to the correct candidate.
So the 3 states that you mentioned, Georgia, Nevada, and Wisconsin, what is different about how those states run their elections that make them hurdles for Joe Biden potentially being removed from the ballot?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is probably going to be Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a pretty, has a very explicit statute on withdrawal that has to do with withdrawal only for death. So that generally, there's a lot of novel issues here. This doesn't really happen in our elections. We don't have candidates that die before an election, and we certainly haven't had a presidential candidate die since, I don't think, since this century. So, Wisconsin statute has essentially said once the ballot is certified, so generally speaking, this likely applies once they've gone through the convention, they've got their candidate, they said this is the guy they're putting up, the electors are going to be delegated to him. Once they do that, the only way to withdraw Biden's name is going to be through death. Georgia has a similar statute. The substitution limitations are a little bit different. And again, there's all different types of dates. Some of these are 64 days before the election. Some of them are 74. So there's a lot of different triggering mechanisms that are going to start going off once they do try to pull them out post-convention or even before. So the before convention, though, they've already made a workaround. So that you've got Ohio, the Secretary of State down there was saying that they were going to essentially, you're going to have to figure it out and, either get this convention done earlier or we'll have to call a legislative session. They called it. It stalled. The DNC has a workaround. I think it's an open question whether or not virtual delegates, which is what the DNC is doing in Ohio, essentially saying that their delegates are going to vote for Biden before the convention or be, given to Biden before the convention, whether or not that would work in a withdrawal situation. It's a completely different scenario. So There's a lot of obstacles there.
Man, this is Matheu Heritage Foundation is here on KCMO. All right, so really, we're just all going to be watching them the same thing. The Democratic Convention takes place, it starts on August 19th. So if anything's going to happen here, Max, the reality is it's going to be in the next few weeks. But I got to imagine that politically speaking, with each passing day that Joe stays around, the less likely all of this becomes because of not just the legal hurdles, but also, and I don't know if you guys have talked about this as much at the Heritage Foundation, but I saw over the weekend at the Wall Street Journal, the money side of this. The money can only be transferred to Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other barrel of worms, right? I mean, look, they don't have the infrastructure for another candidate to just come in here, swoop in, aside from Harris. And, her polling numbers haven't been so hot in to the actual election fight for November against Trump. And so, I think they've got, I think they're between a rock and a hard place, Pete.
Wow. Max, thanks for all your work at the Heritage Foundation. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being here in Kansas City.
Hey, thanks so much, Pete.
You bet.